Today we're going to be discussing some Dungeons & Dragons, Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 1st edition. And this time we're going to take what we did from last week and move it one step up. So we had initiative and surprise with last week. Now we're going to go through more of an actual combat attacking round. Today we've got some additional props. And what I'm looking at here is I've decided that every square is roughly 3 foot. That will sort of help with some of the explanations, but obviously you can use whatever scale you want. We've got corridor, the human fighter. I've rolled up the stats and the abilities and generated a character for a human fighter, which obviously needs light, and that's why the goblins are laying in wait. So we're assuming that no one's surprised because we've already covered how surprise works. Now we're looking at more the actual combat element of the initiative round. So what we'll be looking at today is using the weapon adjusted for to hit armor classes, and just going over some of the to hit rolls and obviously some damage. So we can just start with a brief explanation as to what we've got in each of the characters, and then we can move on to the battle. Okay, so for the goblins, we're looking at a short sword and a hand axe for the melee weapons, and both those weapons have a similar range or space required, which is about 1 foot. So what you're looking at from the main, in this instance, it's sort of roughly scale. So we're looking at 1 foot radius around. So as you can imagine, if you had multiple goblins trying to attack something, it's not like you can swarm in the same way as you would think you could. Combat tactics will come into play, and that's something that the DM will need to work on. So if you've got a specific military unit or a well-trained army and forces, then the different types of weapons come into use and so on. For the short bow, there's one with a short bow. This is short range, which is, as long as you can see it, you can hit it. In a dungeon, it would be not common for anything longer than short range. That's a 50-foot indoor range for the short bow. The human fighter, chainmail armor and longsword, needs 3 feet, which is sort of about that. So if you imagine that a 10-foot corridor is 3 squares across and a bit on each side, you're not able to actually have more than 1 or 2 characters that know how to fight together at the front and taking on something. And on the flip side, if you've got the 10-foot corridor and you've got this character there, you're not going to be surrounded. And sometimes that's why miniatures are good. You can use anything, bits of paper, markers, just something, especially if you can get it into scale. That is something that will always be useful. So then you can actually get an idea of how much space you've got to play with. But we work with the tools that we have, and graph paper and a pencil is always one of the better options. All right, let's get to the scenario. So here we have our human fighter that's stumbling across the dungeon for whatever reason, alone, perhaps separated by the party, or perhaps deciding to try and do a bit of forward scouting. Either way, waiting in the wings are some goblins. So what we do is we're assuming that there's no surprise, because we just want to remove that as a factor in this instance. And we're going to go straight on to initiative. Purple being the player character. The fighter takes the initiative. As it happens, to get the fighter to here, to make him or her, to make the fighter ineffective in combat, it's approximately 9 feet. The fighter has chainmail armor, which is listed as a 9-inch movement. That allows for a full 1 minute dungeon crawl of 90 feet per minute. In combat, plus to attack and so on, 9 feet is the value used. If the target was further away, say for instance the fighter decided to not go for this target but go for that target, that would take up the entire movement of the fighter, and as well as any opportunity for attacks. If the fighter was aware that that character was there. Assuming a light source, the fighter has approximately about this as a range of sight, so just short. So, having one initiative, doing what fighters like to do, moving into combat. No missile weapons, no parley, not going to wait and see what the goblins are doing, straight up attack. This is where some extra work needs to happen for the DM. If the DM has decided to use the weapon adjustment charts so every weapon has some modifiers based on the base armor class of the target. For many monsters and for many other creatures, the DM's going to need to work out a base armor class chart in itself. The goblins have an armor class of 6, and because they're small and they're scurrying and they're a little bit more dexterous, they're a little bit more gnome-y, halfling-y sort of style, I've decided that they're using leather armor as their leather armor as their base AC, so base AC 8, which means that that 2 modifier would be related to their combat savvy, related to their quickness and fleetness of foot, and so on. Everyone has to come up with their own little system, and not 2 systems will be the same. And DM might look at it and go, armor class 6, okay, I'm using that as a ring mail. And that's what the DM does. Whatever their armor class is, works it out. But that's something that every DM has to figure out, and it's a little bit more heavy lifting for the DM. And it's nice when you've got players who are able to take on some burdens of their own character classes and working out their own characters, and that helps. But if the DM has to obviously help the players along and do all of these things, it can get cumbersome. But for the more advanced DMs, this might be a handy tool, because every weapon being a little bit different, come in with a long sword, different to come in with a short sword, coming in with different, and so on. As we saw with the space required, and with ranges and all of those sorts of things, you're looking at weapons of using the right weapon for the right job, instead of just blustering through with a 2-handed sword and having 3 of them lined up shoulder to shoulder in a 10-foot wide corridor. So it's sort of as I said, extra heavy lifting, but in this instance I've gone with AC 8 for the goblins. And what the DM may want to do sometimes, and certainly experience has shown that many DMs do it, using cobbled pieces of armor to represent a different armor class base. So an orc may always have an armor class of 6, but they could be a base armor class 5 or base armor class 4 if they've got a shield. But it's just that it's poorly designed armor, poorly fitting armor, poorly whatever armor. It's still chainmail, and the players still have to try and fight their way through it. Sort of allows an extra layer of individuality, and it's something that you can work with. So these particular goblins are armor class 6, and versus armor class base of 8, the longsword is a 0 modifier. So our fighter, to hit armor class 6, needs a 14 or higher. The fighter does have a 16 strength, which gives them a +1 to damage, but first they've got to hit. Rolling a 12. Miss. This is considered engaged in melee combat. Missile fire comes first, before everything else. And this guy is gonna fire. He's firing to melee. He's got half versus a 1. So you work out how that ratio. 2 and 4 on a d6, 1 to 2, 3 to 4. You never actually declare that you're firing against that character, you just say, I'm firing to melee. You do not get an opportunity to pick at this point. So 1 to 2, 3 to 4. Hitting his own guy. Here we go. So with the armor class of 6, you're looking at the archer hitting. They've got to hit armor class 0 of 20, so armor class 6 goes to 14, and the modifier for the short bow is a +2. So for the short bow to hit base armor class 8 requires a 12 or higher for this particular, for going up against a goblin. So there you go. He's just hit his own guy, rolling for damage. 2 damage. Puts an arrow firmly into the back of the guy, of the little goblin, who's obviously going to be very upset that this is going on. These sorts of shenanigans are happening. But now comes the next phase in the goblin turn, and that is movement. This guy, goblins have a 6-inch movement rate, and so that means he can move 6 feet. So he can move to here and still engage with the fighter. The fighter having a 3-foot range and him having his 1-foot range. They're still within, their circles still collide. The hand axe against base armor class 4 is a -2. And misses. Now at the end of the round, oh sorry, we got one other attack from the other goblin. This one taking there, and misses. So now at the end of the round, this goblin has to decide what it's doing. 2 halves versus a 1. Does it go the 50-50? It's going to. So it's going to shoot into melee, where now it's got a 50-50 chance. What we'll use is a d8. 1 to 2, 3 to 4, 5 to 8. 1 to 2, 3 to 4, 5 to 8. 1 to 2, 3 to 4, 5 to 8. Hits, and that's an attack against the fighter. Base armor class 4. Short bow has a -1, and that goes to 14 on his attack, on the attack roll, and misses. Flies straight over. So now it's time for initiative again. Simultaneous combat. Combat is happening simultaneously in this round. Archer goes first, 1 to 2, 3 to 4, 5 to 8. Going for the human, emboldened by the human, by success last time. 14 goes to 13, misses. Simultaneous combat. The short sword and hand axe are faster weapons, so they go first. So if you're playing with the if you're playing with the weapon adjustment types, then space required comes into play, obviously, as well as speed factor. And the speed factor of the weapons can sometimes allow for multiple actions and so on. If you've got a two-handed sword with a speed factor of up to 10, and you've got short swords, they can get multiple opportunities to strike during the combat round. But here we go. This goblin misses. That goblin misses. The fighter also misses. And now we're down to initiative again. Sorry, this guy gets his other attack. 1 to 2, 3 to 4, 5 to 8. This guy. Now armor class 6, so it's normally a 14. Short bow versus AC 8 means 12 or higher. Missed. So it goes just into here. Now we're initiative. Goblins. Go first. Missile fire. Firing to melee. To this guy. As you can see, firing to melee is not always a good idea. And that one hits. Killing the goblin. This goblin attacks. Missing. It's amazing. This one to this guy. So now we've got our fighter response. 12 and just out of range. Not quite there yet. And this goblin gets his second attack at the end. Forgot to determine who the target was. 1 to 2, 4 to 6. On the fighter, misses. And initiative. Simultaneous combat. Bow. Onto the fighter. Missing. Short sword goes first. Missing. And the fighter's response. Fighter hits. Fighter rolls a D8. Small to medium is a longsword, is a D8. Doing 3 damage. 2 plus 1 for exceptional strength, which is exactly the amount of hit points they have, but this one's goners. And now, this one gets his final attack. Hitting the fighter for 6 points of damage. Boom, square right in. So the next round is initiative, and this one's telling because we've got reasonable enough range for that fighter to do there. It's going to take his entire movement. Not going to be able to attack. If the goblin goes first, the goblin has a chance to flee, and so the actions are declared the goblin has said flee, the fighter has said move to engage. Fighter is purple. If the fighter wins, they'll move into combat range. Then when this one retreats, he gets an attack. If the goblin side wins initiative, they get to flee and disappear into the darkness. Goblins win initiative. First action, flee. Gawn. G-A-W-N. Well, they move 60 feet, which would be enough to get off this board anyway. Then the fighter is stuck. And that's pretty much exactly how combat works. It can be drawn out, it can be fast and furious. It's very brutal. That fighter now has 6 hit points less than what it started with and doesn't get an opportunity to heal until someone heals him. So he doesn't just get to say, I'm spending some time to get some extra oomph. It has to actually be healed by someone or find ways of healing. So prolonged combat and drawn out combats. And this is why in first edition AD&D, surprise is so crucial. If you can get surprise on your opponent, and if you can get into a surprise round, that's hits scored that don't come back. And it may sound kind of on the offside, but you're looking to get your opponents into positions of disadvantage from behind whilst they're not expecting it, outnumbering them a lot, and all of that. You need to really hit hard and fast to do as much as you can, which is not easy. 2 fighters probably could have handled that. 1 fighter was always going to struggle. And each of those goblins are worth 13 experience points. Oh, those 2 anyway, that were at the front. That's how combat rolls. That's how we roll in combat. And this time I was able to use some props to sort of hopefully try and make something a little bit clearer. If you have any other questions, please leave a comment. Always trying to make sure that first edition AD&D is deconstructed and demystified as much as possible. Yeah, it's a game system that's still solid after 40 years. Thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to doing another one.